In today's story, we travel back into the year 1843, into the deeply complex and brutal world of the American South, to explore a case that has remained clouded in mystery, exaggeration, fear, and fragments of truth passed between generations. This is not a tale of glorifying suffering, nor an attempt to sensationalize a tragic period of history, but an examination of one of the most unsettling slave auction accounts ever recorded in Charleston, South Carolina. A story that historians still debate, a story whispered in archives and preserved in letters, a story that challenges everything we assume about resistance, power, fear, and survival. This is the mystery of a man described at the time as the most dangerous male slave ever sold in Charleston. Charleston in 1843 was one of the busiest slave trade hubs in the United States. Ships docked continuously, and traders gathered in packed markets, bargaining over human lives the same way others might negotiate livestock. Yet, among the thousands who were forced through this brutal system, one man's arrival stood out enough to be recorded by witnesses who believed they had seen something extraordinary. His name was not preserved in any single definitive document. In some accounts he appears as Elias, in others he is referred to simply as the African, and in still others he is mentioned only by descriptions of his height, his stare, and the chilling reputation that preceded him before he even arrived at the auction block. What is consistent, however, is that everyone who described him spoke of a presence that was impossible to ignore. He was said to be tall, powerfully built, with broad shoulders and a scar that cut across his face. The scar itself became a piece of evolving mythology. Some claimed it was from an attempted escape in Georgia. Others insisted he had earned it in a fight with slave catchers in Florida. One trader even wrote that the man had carved the scar onto his own face as a defiant symbol of resistance. None of these accounts can be confirmed, but together they paint the image of a man who symbolized danger to the slaveholding society, not because he harmed anyone without cause, but because he refused to behave submissively. When he arrived in Charleston on a chilly February morning, he was transported in heavy iron restraints usually reserved for those considered escape risks. But the guards leading him claimed he had not spoken a single threatening word during the entire journey. They described him as calm, silent, and watchful. To those who controlled the system, that silence was far more terrifying than aggression. It suggested purpose, intelligence, and a mind constantly calculating. The auction house records from that day show something unusual. Instead of being displayed immediately, as was the common practice, the man was kept away from the crowd for several hours. Traders argued about who would take responsibility for presenting him. Several refused entirely. It was not because they believed he would attack anyone in the room. It was because this man represented an idea that slave traders feared, a person who, despite unimaginable brutality, had not broken. Some witnesses described his presence as overwhelming. They wrote that his eyes communicated a message that did not require words, a message that he did not accept the identity forced upon him, a message that frightened even the most hardened traders who built their lives on forced control. When he was finally brought out, the room shifted. The auctioneer, who was normally animated and confident, hesitated. He introduced the man with a trembling voice, calling him the most dangerous male slave ever sold in Charleston. What he meant by dangerous can be interpreted in many ways. perhaps dangerous to the slaveholder's sense of control, perhaps dangerous because of his strength and refusal to bow his head, perhaps dangerous because he represented the exact form of resistance that terrified the slaveholding world, the human spirit refusing to surrender. What followed was one of the strangest auctions ever recorded in Charleston. When the opening bid was announced, several potential buyers stepped back. Some folded their arms, others exchanged whispers, a few left the room entirely. Owning a man like this, they feared, could bring judgment, retaliation, or something even greater. The knowledge that the person they claimed to own was their equal in every measurable way except freedom. But not everyone was afraid. There were always men who believed they could crush the will of anyone, men who thought brutality made them invincible. One such buyer stepped forward, a plantation owner from Alabama named Jonathan Pike. Pike had a reputation for cruelty, something so well known that even other slaveholders whispered about him. He approached the auction block, examined the man's shoulders, arms, and hands, and declared that he could tame anyone. Those words would later be repeated in letters and testimonies, not because they were brave, but because of the chilling arrogance behind them. The bid closed, and the man was sold to Pike for a price considerably lower than most adult men of his age and physical condition. Traders noted that the lower price reflected the risk the buyer was taking. Pike seemed satisfied with the bargain, but the story does not end there. If anything, this is where the real mystery begins. On the journey back to Alabama, something strange happened. Pike, who typically traveled with multiple guards, claimed he needed no extra security. He believed that intimidation alone would be enough to keep the man in chains and under control. But witnesses would later report that Pike spoke to the man repeatedly during the trip, trying to provoke him, taunt him, test him. He never reacted, not with anger, not with fear, not with words. His silence seemed to frustrate Pike more than resistance would have. 3 days into the journey, the caravan stopped at a small lodge. The guards rested. Pike locked the man in a reinforced wagon, secured with 3 heavy chains, but by morning the impossible had occurred. The wagon door was open, the chains were still locked, and the man was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken boards, no footprints leading away from the wagon, nothing that could be traced. It was as if he had simply vanished into the night. Pike immediately accused his guards of falling asleep or being bribed. The guards accused Pike of forgetting to secure the lock. Local authorities searched the surrounding forests, rivers, and marshland for several days. Not a single trace was found. This unexplained disappearance created shockwaves through the slaveholding states. Rumors spread rapidly. Some claimed he had been rescued by abolitionists. Others said he had died in the swamps and was never found. A few believed he had made his way north and lived the rest of his life as a free man, hiding his identity to avoid recapture. But the most unsettling rumor came from Pike himself. In later years, after losing much of his wealth and reputation, Pike would swear that he had seen the man again. Not in person, but standing in the distance near his property, watching him silently. Whether this was a hallucination born from guilt, fear, or obsession, no one could ever determine. Historians now believe that this man, whoever he truly was, became a symbol of resistance. A symbol so powerful that slaveholders invented legends to explain their own fear. To them, a person who refused to submit was the greatest threat imaginable. not because he wielded weapons or participated in uprisings, but because he demonstrated that slavery could never fully erase humanity or self-worth. The mystery remains unsolved. No definitive documentation records his life before the auction. No verified account captures what happened after his disappearance. He lives only in fragments of recollection, scattered newspaper mentions, personal letters, and whispered retellings that shifted with each generation. But perhaps this is fitting, for a man who refused to let others define him. Maybe the absence of a complete story is itself a form of freedom. Today, this tale forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about history. Those who were feared the most by the oppressive systems of the past were not the violent, but the unbroken. Those who carried dignity even in chains. Those who challenged oppression simply by refusing to surrender their identity. And although we may never know his real name or his fate, the man described as the most dangerous male slave ever sold in Charleston endures as a reminder of resilience, mystery, and the indestructible nature of the human spirit. In telling this story, we do not glorify suffering. Instead, we honor endurance. We acknowledge the tragedy of a society built on oppression, and we keep alive the memory of someone who, even in the darkest chapter of American history, refused to be defined by fear. If this story made you reflect, if it awakened questions about the past, or if it reminded you of the importance of dignity and justice, then it has served its purpose. History is not just a list of dates and events. It is a mirror, and sometimes the stories we uncover challenge us to see ourselves differently